How you going, buddies? I am Jacaro Toro, and on this channel I focus on Australian Aborigines, their languages, cultures, history, and so on. And this is the third video about social organization in Australia and about the section systems that we find in big parts of Australia. Just to recapitulate, in a section system, the people in a society are divided into groups, 4 groups. And who you can marry usually depends on what group you belong to yourself. So, already Donald Davidson, an American who came to Australia to do linguistic work, already Donald Davidson noted in 1928 that there are only 3 sets of names used for the sections outside of Queensland in northeastern Australia. So down this way and out west. Only 3 sets of names for the sections. While in Queensland there is a great proliferation of names and also a great proliferation of section systems, as it so happens. Patrick McConville writes about this in this book that I have mentioned before, Skin, Kin and Clan, from 2018, which is available online here. More specifically, he writes about this in the chapter The Birds and the Bees. And the reason for the title is that this is about the birds and the bees. Literally, because in Queensland we find that in many systems the sections have names that are either bird names or bee names. Yes, and McConville, he thinks that the cradle of the section systems in Australia could be here. And as I said, he lists 13 such systems. A big one, the biggest one in Queensland, he calls the Queensland General System because it is found in most of the inland of the state south of the Cape York Peninsula, and it reaches the coast in this area here. By the way, in the northernmost part of the Cape York Peninsula, they only have patrimoieties, no section systems. So, in McConville's opinion, there is a certain amount of evidence for that this could be the cradle of the Australian section systems. One of the systems he looks at in order to try to prove this is the one of the Gogo-Nyungal tribe, also known as Gogo-Nyungal. It was called the Annan River tribe in 1904 by this fella when he described their section system, because they lived on the Annan River here, which has its mouth in this area where the dot is. So, here, these people lived with the Gogo-Yimitir people to their north, and it's from this language that we get the word kangaroo. And they had the Gogo-Yalanji people to the south, from which tribe comes Cathy Freeman, by the way. Cathy Freeman, perhaps a former Australian athlete. Yes, and this language is almost extinct by now. But it would seem that it is and has been intermediate between these two. So in Kuugu Jalanji, this language was called Kuugu Bunyon, literally bad language. And according to the Kuugu Jimittir, these people spoke with mumbling talk, which is incidentally what we here in Sweden often say about the Danes. Swedish and Danish are really very closely related, but in the opinion of many Swedes, the Danes mumble very much, and therefore they are very difficult to understand. So, here we have a lot of stuff. First of all, within this tribe, they both have moieties. They have 2 moieties, patrimoieties, and they have a section system. So they have 2 types of social organization, which, as I mentioned in the first video, does occur in Australia. So these are the terms as they were written by Howitt, or is it Hewitt, or something else? Anyway, and here we have modern spelling. And we have 2 eagle species and 2 bee species. Now, it seems to be somewhat unclear what species of birds these words denote, because you see often when linguists record terms in Aboriginal languages, they don't go out bush together with their consultants to see exactly which animals are being talked about. Rather, they often go for something more generic like this. Here, this walar would seem to be the Tetragonula carbonaria or something like that. A small bee species living along the coast, which is all black, hence carbonaria, while Doro, or something along those lines, is a slightly larger bee species that has yellow stripes and that lives inland. So here we have 4 sections. 2 with bird names and 2 with bee names. And according to this fella, these animals were apparently also totems for the different sections. We also have KY here and GY there and a question mark. KY stands for Kuugu Jalanji, which means that these words are identical to words in Kuugu Jalanji. With GY, the words are identical to words in Kuugu Jimittir. So, and this is not the prototypical Carriera system, by the way. In the prototypical Carriera system, we, in McConville's terminology, have covert matrimoieties, since which section a child belongs to depends on the section of the mother. Here we have covert patrimoieties, which according to McConville shows that this section system is based on 2 earlier patrimoiety systems that were combined. So covert patrimoieties, which means that which section a child is placed in, it depends on the section of the father. So marriages happen this way and this way. And if the father is here, the child is placed in that section, and the other way around, and the same goes over here. So how has this system come about, where we have a few terms that are identical to Kuugu Jalanji, a couple of terms that are identical to Kuugu Yimitir, and one that does not seem to have another meaning than as a section name in this language. And it is also unclear where it comes from. In this general area, though, this is a common word for wedge-tailed eagle. But anyway, the history of this word in this language is somewhat unclear. So how has this system come about? Here is McConville's theory, and he underlines that it's a theory and that more research is needed in order to show if this is indeed what happened or not. So, originally, two groups came into contact with each other. One group had a patrimoiety system with eagle names. The other group had a patrimoiety system with bee names. They met. In the beginning, there were no intermarriages. And then intermarriages started to happen. And at that point, a translation of the patrimoiety systems also started to happen if it hadn't started earlier. This is the same thing that happens when people with different section systems in Australia meet. There can be slight variations, or the variations can be larger. But when people that come from these different systems meet, they start to translate. So you belong to that section. That corresponds to this section in my system, and so on. So, one bee moiety became identified with one eagle moiety. Yes, and the other bee moiety became identified with the other eagle moiety. So that's stage 2, when intermarriages started to happen. Then there are more and more intermarriages between the groups until exogamy becomes the norm. So marrying someone from the other language group. And moiety exogamy also becomes the norm, which is to say that if you belong to one of the eagle moieties, you need to marry someone from the bee moiety that is identified with the other eagle moiety. So you cannot marry someone from the bee moiety that is identified as being the same as your eagle moiety. If that makes sense. As I have said, this is never terribly simple and straightforward when we're talking about kinship systems in Australia. So exogamy and moiety exogamy becomes the norm over time. And then when it has become the norm, it also becomes the marriage rule. And from that, the section system develops. That is McConville's theory. He also looks at a section system of a tribe here in the Mackay area, along Queensland's central coast. He calls the tribe Guinmal. Now, this is a bit confusing because it would seem that Guinmal has been used as a name for two different tribes. I would suspect that he means the tribe that lived just south of Mackay in traditional times. That would be this tribe. And he sees a certain amount of evidence in their section system for that it developed from two patrimoiety systems. And then he also looks at the Queensland general system. And there he sees a certain amount of evidence for that it may have developed from the combination of one patrimoiety and one matrimoiety system. But he says that more research is needed. But I'm not going to go through the Queensland general system and this Guinmal system in detail here. This is probably all or enough for today, but I will be back. So, see you later.